Hello and welcome to this Synergex Webucation presentation, a customer demonstration by United Natural Foods, a company based in Dayville, Connecticut. My name is Steve Ives and I'm a senior consultant working in the Synergex Professional Services Group. It's my great pleasure this morning to introduce the presenter for today's session, my good friend Chris Blundell. Many of you will already know Chris from various Synergex conferences over the years, or as the author of several excellent submissions in the Synergy Code Exchange. Chris's job title is Senior Systems Integration Architect, a position which I'm sure makes good use of his broad range of expertise in many aspects of software development, but I'll leave it for him to tell you a little bit more about his company and his role. Chris's presentation is based on a session that he presented earlier this year during the Success Partners conferences held in Boston, Massachusetts and London, England earlier this summer.
Hi, and thanks a lot for that, Steve. It's quite a glowing recommendation. I hope I can live up to it. So, as Steve said, my name is Chris Mendell. I work for United Natural Foods based in Dayville in Connecticut. I've been working for them for about 10 years. They are actually the largest publicly traded wholesale distributor to the natural organics food industry. Some 40,000 products, 18,000 customers. That's probably even gone up a little bit because we're still a growing company. I think we had somewhere in the region of $3.4 billion in revenues this last year, which was an increase over last year, which in this economy is actually doing really well. We sell to regular retail formats, supernatural chains, and also the regular supermarkets as well. We've got locations all over the U.S., although our Synergy development is mainly done on the East Coast. And we have a couple of different systems, so we have a lot of integrations to do with those systems and communications. We do fulfillment of ordering, using web services between the systems. And as I say, on the East Coast, we are definitely a VMS shop using Synergy. We're currently going through an upgrade to version 9. But I've been doing Dieball and Synergy for the last 20 years. Also done Informatics, SQL, .NET, originally from Liverpool in the UK. Started as a consultant when I first came over to the US and got taken on by the company, and I've been here ever since. As Steve said, I'm the Systems Integration Architect here. What that actually is, I'm not quite sure because it seems to be just about everything, so that's where we're going. Started on PDP-11s, through Baxes, Alphas. I've done Synergy on Unix and Windows. The original system that we use now was a package system that was brought in, purchased, and has been heavily modified since then. So it bears a resemblance to the original system, but probably not that much. And as I say, we're currently going through an upgrade to version 9 from version 8, and that's an ongoing project that we're dealing with right now. Most of the developers here are using Workbench for their development, and that might be a little bit of a misnomer for some people. We have all of our development is on VMS, so Workbench is using SAMBA, or as it's called now, CIFS, to access the VMS file system as though it was a Windows file system, which allows us to use Workbench to access that code. Now what that does give us is the ability to use all of the Workbench tools as if we were developing on Windows, even though we're not. We do use XF Server for accessing repository information so that we get to use the Windows versions of things like repository, MDU, and things like that, which actually works out pretty well. Some of the utilities that we use, we do web service SOAP calls from Synergy, using Synergy APIs, plus some wrapping stuff that we did. We do email, which was originally based on the Code Exchange email that's been out there for a long time, which was modified somewhat to handle different kinds of file attachments. One of the things I'll be showing today is the record locking utilities that we have, or not actually locking, but finding people who have records locked. And we do some GUI front ends as well, which I'll show you that with the record locking utility. Kind of both of those go together. So, why do we use SAMBA? Big reason it's actually free. There's no client licenses or anything like that you have to pay for to use SAMBA. It was originally developed as a Unix or Linux utility, and it's been ported to OpenVMS since then. OpenVMS Engineering, or HP, have actually picked up that now, and they've developed SAMBA 3, which they've renamed to SIFs. And that's a free download layered product from HP. And that's what we'll be using today. So here's a screenshot real quick of how the file system on VMS looks through SAMBA. You really can't tell the difference from a regular Windows shared drive if you were looking at that, except for maybe some of the file names and stuff like that that you might recognize as VMS file extensions. Okay, so why do we want to use Workbench? It's a full-featured editor. It's like a lot of people are used to using Visual Studio or other editors in Windows. It does have, syntax highlighting, context tagging. So why would you use that in reference to a terminal editor, which really has not an awful lot to offer over and above just a simple text editor? So that's why we went along the lines of using Workbench. So here's our VMS. So normally when you're compiling stuff on VMS, what are you doing? You're normally writing a conf stream, which is going to be compiling whatever code you're going to be doing. So I'm going to do this is going to execute a conf stream, which is just going to do the build, which I'm going to show in a few minutes that we'll be able to do through Workbench as well, and I'll show you how exactly we do that. So I hit that, and away we go. It goes through and does the build. And we can show that running or do whatever. It's actually just a couple of different programs. So it's building a shared image, adding to an object library, doing regular DVLs, compiles, and then linking a few main programs. Okay, so from that, what we might do is, if I open a project here, which I've got one open, this is actually the same project with all of the source files from VMS. I can take any one of these and open them up. So this is a piece of code that's available from the Code Exchange, which runs a query on the lock finder utility that's out there and returns that information. So I can take this, make that the default project, and then we have a build server, which is just a little utility that actually makes a connection to VMS and then listens to connections from Workbench. Start that, make the connection. Now I can go in here and I can say build the project, and what it'll do is it'll go out there. What you'll see on the screen is exactly the same thing that we just saw on VMS. And there's all the same output coming right back to Workbench. So we can see exactly what happened with our build. And that did not happen on Windows. That actually happened on VMS and did exactly the same thing that this build did. So that said, how does this stuff actually work? Well, what we have is this utility here, which is basically connecting to a service that's running on VMS on one port and then listening for connections from anything else in another port. So we can define what those ports are, we say what we want to connect to, and then we can actually make that connection. And that stays running, so that gives you a persistent connection. So any logicals that you define or anything like that stay persistent for your entire session. The other thing that it will do is in your project configuration, if you have any definitions set up in the Workbench macros, those will be executed on the VMS system. So you can define logicals at the project level and stuff like that. The tools themselves are actually really simple. Basically, the first one is to execute the start server command, which is just a simple line that's just executing that build service. And then for each command thereafter, like this build project, what we're doing is we're saying, go execute the remote build program, send it a command, which is actually saying the same thing that we said on VMS, which is executing that com stream. We say where the build service is actually running, and we say what port we want to connect to it on. And that's all we need to do to actually get that executing. The remote build service itself executes on VMS. If I do a show system on here, what we'll see is that we have up here these RMBLD. There is one execution of this routine for each client that's connected and doing remote builds, and the number that's after it is the port number that VMS is actually connected on. And there's also one main routine that runs out there that does the same thing. There should be an RMBLD just all on its own, which is the main routine that spawns everything else off from. So anyway, that's basically all we need to run out there. So that being said, what do we need to do to Workbench to make it more useful? There's a couple of things that you can do, and what I'll do is I'll open up one of the project files for the record locking. This is the project file itself, and what you can do is if you want to set up special commands, a lot of times it's easier to actually just go through the project file than do each command on its own. So we have here the two commands that were added to this that we can add in and set them up as the commands that will be in the tools menu. We can also add and remove programs from here as well and define the layout. The other thing that we can do is, I'm just going to take a quick piece from over here. We have the macro pieces. Now what I'm going to do here is immediately after the file section, which is down here, what I should be able to do is add this piece in here, which is how the macros are actually defined. And the commands that are going to get executed on VMS when you first execute the build server is anything that's prefixed with this WB remote. You can use in those commands any of the special macros or shortcuts that are in Workbench to be able to define where those macros are pointing or what the contents of some of those macros are going to be. So for example, I can define build root to be a directory with the name of the project that I'm actually working in today. So I don't need to keep modifying that line if everything builds from a standard root. And then I can define my other logicals as well, and I can execute com streams or just execute commands on VMS using any one of these symbols that are defined with WB remote. So that said, if I close this now, save it, if I go back into the project, what I should be able to see is now all of those appear as macros in the open tab on the project properties. And if I stop the build server and reconnect it, what will happen is that all of those commands will be executed on the VMS side as soon as I hit the build server. As part of that, I also have the ability to be able to open up a window in here and be able to type commands. So I can do a show user on here, and it will come into this window. So that is doing exactly the same thing that the Workbench does, but it's doing it through a little utility in the Win server itself. So if you have something special that you want to do that you don't want to do through Workbench, you can actually come into here and execute, define a new logical or do whatever it is that you need to do. So most of your time when you're developing, you actually don't even need to be touching VMS. The only time that you really need to go on VMS is to actually execute the code. And that's what I find most people do. They do all the builds through Workbench. It lets you stay in one location to do most of your development, which is always nice and convenient. So what do we need to do to actually install the build server? There are a couple of things. If you download the zip files from the code exchange on the Synergy website, there are 2 zip files in there. One is a remote build Windows, and the other is a remote build VMS. Basically, all you need to do to get this working is to copy the remote build VMS zip file to VMS, unzip it, and just execute do one define of a logical, and to tell it where the build route is, and execute it, and then you'll be able to use it immediately. It's real simple, takes about 5 minutes, and the benefits have been pretty big for us, I think. So how do we create a new project? I'll show that real quick. I'll actually re-add one of the projects that we have, but I'll call it a different name. So I'm going to create a new project. I'm going to call it Customer Demo. Create it under the current workspace, because I'm just going to add it to this workspace. Ask me whether I want to create it. I say yes, and now we can add the files to it. And what we do here is we have pretty much a standardized way of defining what the shared drives are that we use. So I can go to my U drive, which is my user directory on VMS, and as you can see, it's pointing to one of our VMS nodes called DevAS4, and it's my home directory on there. So I can say OK to that. Now if I go to this file utility, I can say take that and everything underneath it as well, and add that to my project. And as you can see, it went and found all these files and just added them to the project. As soon as I hit OK, it's going to tag those files, and it's going to add them to the current workspace. As you can see, they're all in the source files. They're kind of mixed up depending on what directory they're in. We'll see files that are in subs, files that are in source directories. It's actually really easy to change that view as well. What you can do is you can just right-click. There's an auto folder, and you can say look at the directory view. It's going to give you a warning, but it really doesn't make any difference when you switch back anyway. So I'm going to say yes to that. And now I can look at it as the paths where each of those things are actually defined. So I can see all my objects, my sources, my subroutines, all of that stuff. By standard, you'll see that the build service and the remote build are not part of the menu options. So what I can do is I can go in and I can edit the project properties. But what I'll do first is I will actually open the file utility project that I had previously so that I can cheat a little bit and take these bottom 2 items here, and I can open the current customer demo project that we've got. Open that project, and I can go down to the bottom of this target section and just insert that. There we go. Okay, so now we've got that inserted in. What I can do is I can save that. If I go back into the project menu and look at the project properties and the tools, what we'll see now is that we have build project in there, and we have the start build service. So the next thing I'll do is I'll go back into here, look to see if we have any macro extensions, which we do have a couple, to define where the repository is that we're looking at for this particular one. And then I can go back into the customer demo one, and I can do the same thing again. I can just insert that right in there. Save it out. And now, if I look in the project properties, what I should see is we now have the 3 new items in here. They're prefixed with WB Remote, which means that when we start the build service, it will actually take each of these and execute them in turn on the VMS side. So now I should be able to go into build and say start build service. I can check the options, make sure that my ports are correct and the machine I'm pointing to is correct. Hit start. Now it's connected. If we look at the results, nothing's actually happened in there yet. What I can do now is I can go into Customer Demo. You can actually get to the Build tools by right-clicking the project as well. And I can say Build Project. And what it should do is go out there and execute the COM stream that we already defined previously. And there we go. So that finished. So now if I go back over here, we can see that the output that went to Workbench also went to here. And we can clear that out. So if you wanted to go back to some previous output that had been deleted out of Workbench, you can actually always see it in here. So let's make sure that what we actually just built actually does do something. So if I go back onto the VMS side, one of the things that we built was the record locking stuff. So what I will do is run exe : lock records, and what that will do is that's just a little program that does nothing more than lock 10 records in a file. And if we go back into here and go back to the original file utility, there is a lock records hiding somewhere in here. All right, so all it's doing is it's opening up 10 different channels. It's finding the first record in our product file on each of those channels, and then it's looping through and either reading the first, second, third, fourth, fifth, or through 10th of those channels. And that's all it's doing, and then sitting waiting for a character. So now we have 10 records locked in that file. So that was what we modified in Workbench, built on VMS through Workbench, and now we're just executing on VMS. So that's actually what's executing there. One thing I did, which I was going to show the Visual Studio project for it, but like I say, I lost my machine and I don't have Visual Studio on this one, so what I'll have to do is just show you the program running. This is a file browser or a record browser, and what it allows you to do is you can select, this goes out through XF Server Plus, reads the repository, brings back all the structure names that are in the repository, and loads them up into a list. It was pretty quick, as you probably see there. I'm going to pick our prod file, or prod structure rather. I'm going to say open that file. So there's the file open. There's all of the fields in that file, and I can scroll up and down. I can sort them. I can filter them using the buttons on here. It's a full-featured list. And the other thing I can do is if I hit next record, what it'll do is it'll go out and actually read the data from that file. And I can scroll through the file and just pull that data back. I can go backwards through the file, forwards through the file. I can see whether there's any locks on that file. And lo and behold, there are 10 locks. So what I can do here is I can say, you know what, this particular record, for example, is a problem because I know this key is locked and I want to go and find out who's actually got that locked. So what I can do is I can just say go in here and I can put in P 010002 and I can say go to key, and that will read that record, as you can see up here. And just so you can see it, because it's a little bit of a narrow screen, there's actually a button on there that says check for locks, which manages to hide itself when it's full screen. This is the RFA of that record, which is what it's going to use to find out who's actually got that locked. It tells you the record length and the current key value that you've got read, which is actually, we know now that that's actually the one that we actually want to find. So I'm going to hit find out who's actually got that locked. So the highlighted row is the lock corresponding to the current RFA value. And say OK to that. I can drop this down, and I can see Chris Blundell has got it locked. I can see what the file is. I can see what he's running, which, oddly enough, is the program that we built through the Workbench. I can see what terminal he's on, and I can see what the process name is, and also the process ID. So if I wanted to go and find out exactly what that process was doing, whether it was sitting there sleeping or he was actually doing something, I can go and use that process ID to go and figure that out. And I can also see the other key values as well. So this went out and read the file, and figured out what each of the key values was for that record within the file, and is actually displaying those in the list as well. So that, I think, is kind of showing the record loss stuff working, and it's also showing the file utility stuff working, which is the two projects that we had in the workbench. And as you saw, we did compile those, so it did pick up the new versions and all that kind of fun stuff. The other thing that we can do with this particular program is, if we want to, we can export this as a PDF. And what it will do is, it'll open a PDF that has all of the fields in that file, what its values are. And you see it has the hex values of each of those fields as well, so if you have any bizarre characters that don't normally print, you can see those in the file. And you can do that for literally any file. I could go and open select one of these other structures, open another file, and just say open the file, and we'd be off on that file at that point. When you say check for locks, what it does is it looks in this field and says whatever the file name is that's in there, that's what we're going to be checking for locks on. If you put an asterisk in there, and I don't know how quick this will be because we're actually on a real system, so I don't know how many locks are out there. But if I hit the asterisk in there and see it's to just say check the locks, that'll show me every single lock on the system, which is not many, which is our development server actually, which is actually a good thing. And we can see who's got that stuff locked. So we see all the different usernames down here for who's actually got each of those records locked. You can see here we have one of our test accounts locking a record. It's actually a batch process. It's our purchase allowance file, and we can see some of the values in there. So, very useful utility. We use a version of this a lot. What I actually do is, if I look in the options in here, because it's node specific, what you can do is, if you have multiple nodes in your cluster, you can list them all down here. So, for example, if we had, oops, I didn't mean to do that. Start that again. There we go. So what you can do in the options in here, I can type in, for example, UNIFAS 3, UNIFAS 1, and I can put the different ports that are associated with that. So let's say they were all the same port on each of those machines, which they're not actually, but let's say they were. What it will do is, when you ask for locks, it will cycle through each one of those nodes and return the locks off each of the nodes, which is useful for finding somebody on a multi-node system. If you've got somebody who's got a lock, it will find it across all of the nodes in the cluster, which is pretty useful. We've actually reduced the number of locks that we have on the system by virtue of being able to find who has stuff locked and being able to call them proactively and say, what is it you're doing? It's like, right now, where are you sitting on a screen? And be able to say, okay, they had a lock, they're sitting on this screen, they're doing nothing, go find that piece of code and make it not lock that record if it doesn't need to. I think that pretty much shows the kinds of things that we've been doing with the workbench, hopefully. So I'll kind of finish it off there and open it up to questions, I guess.
Okay, great. Well, thanks. First of all, Chris, thanks for sharing all that great information with us. It was certainly very interesting. Let's take a quick look and see if we do have any questions out there. Richard has a question. So, Richard, go ahead and ask your question.
I don't know if I can.
I can hear you.
You can hear me?
I can.
Okay. The use of SAMBA, are you using SAMBA anyplace else in your application?
No. We pretty much just use it on our development box today, just for our development process, and that's it. There have been thoughts about using it for some other things. For example, we make a lot of use of BizTalk, And there were thoughts about perhaps setting SAMBA up on our production boxes to allow BizTalk to be able to deposit files that will be processed by the business system. But we have not done that yet.
We've been looking at the same for our web methods for VMS.
Okay, yeah.
Okay.
Thanks for the question, Richard. Anybody else have a question for Chris? Actually, Chris, there's one being typed into the console here. Eric Santos wants to know when is Crispyware going public.
It's kind of already public. It's out there.
Right. Yeah, most of the stuff that gets developed under the Crispyware brand, Eric, and everybody winds up in the Synergy Code Exchange. Chris has been extremely generous over the years and made several contributions in that area, and most of the stuff that he works on like this is little skunkworks projects in the wee hours of the morning, right, Chris, and is generally made available for public use, so I'd certainly like to thank Chris for that. I've got one or two, if I may. I think you may have addressed some of these already, actually. But do the applications that you've created to allow you to execute these remote commands require any specific version of Synergy or any specific version of the Workbench?
There's actually two versions of the remote build. The latest version actually does require Synergy 9.
Okay. Okay. But there's still another one out there that is more generic?
There is, and they're actually both in the code exchange.
Excellent. Okay. I assume the same tools can be used to execute. Well, I guess they can because you've kind of given us a demo. But these tools are not just about Workbench, right? You could use them to execute any commands, not just build commands, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's like the fact that it is kind of session. It remembers the session as it's going, kind of thing. It keeps a persistent connection. Is actually I found kind of really helpful for being able to set up an environment for multiple developers where they're not stepping on each other.
Right. Yeah. Okay. And I assume that server process that you're talking to on the VMS system, that's written in Synergy, is it?
It is. Yeah.
Okay. So it would work on other systems like Unix and Linux, presumably.
It should do. I've not been able to try it on there, I have to admit. I did try it on Windows, but it was kind of a bizarre experience because every time I sent a command, it would open a new background window. But, it's like there didn't seem an awful lot of point in carrying that out on Windows. But for Unix or Linux, I guess it should work. I just haven't been able to try it.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I haven't either, but I can't think of a single reason why it wouldn't. So, yeah, okay. All right, those are the questions I had. I'm just scanning once more. Not seeing any other questions out there from the audience, Chris. So I guess that about wraps things up for us this morning. Again, Chris, thank you very much for taking the time to prepare this session and present it to us. We do really appreciate your efforts. I'd just also like to mention that if you are interested in getting more information about Workbench, then of course you can always talk to your Synergy DE account managers. But also there are several pre-recorded webucation sessions on various Workbench subjects already available in that same place. So at the website, Services Education Webucation, and go take a look at those. They're typically very short subjects, giving you a short, sharp introduction to a certain specific area of Workbench, and we do intend to add more as time goes by. There's, I think, 3 or 4 that we've put up there in very recent weeks on Workbench and a few other subjects as well. So go take a look at those. Okay, once again, thank you very much, Chris. To everybody else out there in the audience, thank you very much for taking the time to join us this morning. We hope you found the session useful. Okay, just one more final scan for questions. No, not seeing anything else. So again, thank you very much, Chris. Thank you very much, everybody. And I'll now draw the meeting to a close.